Before we dive into how a routine traffic stop exposed a police department's darkest secrets, take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Your support helps us bring these untold stories to light. And remember, what happened to Maya could happen to any of us. Rain pattered against the windshield of Maya Johnson's black Audi Q5, the wipers sweeping in a hypnotic rhythm. The Space Needle glowed in the distance, a beacon cutting through the misty Seattle night. She adjusted her rearview mirror, catching sight of the patrol car that had been trailing her since she'd exited I-5. Just another night in the Emerald City, she thought, her fingers tapping the steering wheel to the beat of Kendrick Lamar's "Not Like Us" playing low on the radio. Her phone buzzed. A text from Director Hayes. Asset extraction delayed. Maintain cover. Maya exhaled slowly. Her CIA training had taught her to remain hyper-aware of her surroundings, to notice the subtle shift in atmosphere when something wasn't right. And tonight, everything felt wrong. Officers Jason Reed and Mike Simmons had run this playbook dozens of times before. Target a black driver, fabricate probable cause, plant evidence, and watch another life crumble. But tonight's mark wasn't some random citizen. Maya's Sig Sauer P-226 was holstered beneath her leather jacket, her federal badge concealed in a hidden compartment beneath her seat. The patrol car's lights flashed behind her. Red and blue reflections danced across her mirrors, illuminating the raindrops like tiny, colorful diamonds. "Damn it," she muttered, pulling over to the curb. Reed approached, flashlight beam deliberately blinding her. "License and registration," he barked, rainwater dripping from his police cap. Simmons circled the Audi, his boot deliberately scuffing the rear tire. A signal to his partner, whose body cam was conveniently malfunctioning tonight. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over, officer?" Maya's voice was steady, controlled. "Broken taillight," Reed said, the lie slipping easily from his lips. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Maya knew better than to argue. As she opened her door, she silently activated the emergency beacon in her watch. 1 click, 2 clicks, 3. The signal would reach her team at Langley, but how long would it take them to respond? Behind her, Simmons was already reaching into his jacket pocket, preparing to discover evidence that would send her to King County lockup. What they didn't know was that Maya wasn't just any target. She was the lead investigator on Operation Oversight, a 2-year deep cover mission examining police corruption in major West Coast cities. And these officers had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. The bag of cocaine Simmons found in her glove compartment was still damp from the rain. Maya memorized every detail: Reed's nervous tick of touching his wedding ring when he lied, the precinct's outdated keycard system that beeped twice when activated, the nervous glances from Officer Zoe Chen, a rookie who kept checking her phone and avoiding eye contact. "You'll rot in here," Simmons sneered, slamming the cell door with a metallic clang that echoed through the holding area. "Nobody's coming for you." Maya said nothing, her dark eyes following him as he walked away. She noticed the security camera in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. Every frame's time-stamped, she reminded herself. The longer they stall, the worse this backfires. Time ticked by. Maya sat motionless on the metal bench, her posture betraying nothing of the calculations happening behind her calm facade. 3 cells down, a woman sobbed quietly. Across the aisle, a man nursed what looked like a dislocated shoulder, wincing with each breath. Collateral damage, Maya thought. People caught in the same net, but without her resources, without her training, without the power of a federal agency behind them. Officer Chen approached the cell, clipboard in hand. "Processing paperwork," she mumbled, not meeting Maya's eyes. "They set me up," Maya said quietly, watching for a reaction. Chen's eyes flashed briefly to Maya's face, then away. "Not my business." "It becomes your business when you're complicit," Maya countered. "You know what they did." The rookie's hands trembled slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The security cameras do," Maya said, nodding toward the blinking red light. "And so does this." She leaned forward slightly, revealing the thin chain around her neck, a pendant that contained a miniature recording device, capturing every word, every sound since the moment she was pulled over. Chen paled visibly before hurrying away, her boots squeaking against the worn linoleum floor. Maya leaned back against the cold wall and closed her eyes. Now she waited. 23-year-old Jordan Michaels had been live-streaming police interactions since the 2020 protests. Tonight, his TikTok following of 750,000 watched in real time as he captured footage of Maya's arrest from the window of his apartment overlooking Aurora Avenue. "Y'all seeing this?" his voice whispered over the footage. "They're planting evidence. Look at Officer Simmons. Watch his right hand. They just arrested this sister without cause, and they're already deleting comments. Share this now before it disappears." His phone zoomed in, the digital enhancement feature clarifying Simmons' movements as he slipped something into the glove compartment while Reed distracted Maya. Within hours, Shuck Justice for Maya would accumulate over 3 million views, with creators splicing DIY tutorials on how to record police safely, alongside clips from Maya's viral 2023 TEDx talk on AI surveillance ethics. In a quiet basement office at the Seattle Times, investigative reporter Eliza Wong received an encrypted file from an anonymous source. The subject line read simply, "Officers Reed and Simmons, History of Complaints." Inside was a database of 31 misconduct allegations against the two officers. All mysteriously disappeared from public records. All involving black and brown drivers, all following the same pattern. Eliza's fingers flew across her keyboard, drafting what would become the most explosive story of her career. Meanwhile, at City Hall, Councilwoman Regina Foster's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. The hashtag was everywhere, and citizens were demanding answers. She scrolled through her contacts, stopping at the police chief's number. "This ends tonight," she whispered to herself, pressing the call button. Across town, Detective Marcus Washington watched the TikTok video for the fourth time, his stomach knotting. He'd suspected Reed and Simmons for months, had even filed internal reports that somehow never made it through the chain of command. Now, with public evidence mounting, he made a decision. He reached for his secure phone, the one not issued by the department, and dialed a number few people knew existed. "This is Washington," he said quietly. "I need to speak with Director Hayes immediately. It's about Maya Johnson." While Maya calculated her next move from her cell, a hastily assembled coalition gathered in the basement of the historic community center. Black Lives Matter activists, tenured civil rights attorneys, and a network of police accountability advocates huddled around laptops and phones. "The footage is irrefutable," said community organizer Darius King, his voice urgent as he addressed the room. "But we need more. Reed and Simmons have connections. This will disappear like all the others unless we act decisively." Lakeisha Williams, director of the Seattle Justice Coalition, nodded grimly. "We've got paralegals drafting emergency motions right now, but the union's already mobilizing." Their spokesperson just released a statement claiming the video was deceptively edited. Suddenly the door opened, and Detective Washington stepped in, still in uniform. The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. "I know what you're thinking," he said, hands raised slightly. "But I'm here to help. Those officers have been untouchable for years because of what they know and who they know. This goes higher than you think." He placed a USB drive on the table. Internal affairs reports, body cam footage that was supposed to be lost, evidence of a facial recognition system targeting specific neighborhoods, all conveniently labeled as high crime areas, and direct communication between Captain Reynolds and judges who sign off on questionable warrants. Lakeisha narrowed her eyes. "Why now? Why help us?" Washington's expression hardened. "Because they're using the system I swore to uphold to destroy the very people I swore to protect. And because Maya Johnson isn't who they think she is. When this blows open, and it will, I want to be on the right side of history." Darius studied the detective for a long moment before nodding slowly. "All right, let's get to work." Director Hayes paced the secure operations room, screens surrounding him with live feeds from various angles. One showed the exterior of the precinct. Another displayed Maya's biometric data, heart rate elevated but steady, blood pressure within operational parameters. "How the hell did they grab one of our operatives?" he demanded, glaring at the assembled team. "And why didn't our advance intel flag these officers?" Senior analyst Rachel Chen typed furiously, multiple windows opening on her screen. Sir, they're using PredictPol, that algorithmic patrol system the department adopted last year. It's supposed to deploy officers to high-crime areas, but the data's skewed. It's basically digital redlining. She pulled up a map overlaid with heat signatures. The system consistently sends Reed and Simmons to majority black neighborhoods, with authorization for proactive policing. They've stopped 342% more black drivers than the department average. And the algorithm shields them from oversight, added technical specialist James Kamar. Since the computer dictates their patrol areas, they can claim they're just following the data. Hayes leaned closer to the screen, showing Maya's holding cell. What's her extraction timeline? That's the problem, sir, Rachel replied, her voice tense. Standard protocol would take hours. Warrants, interagency coordination. By then, they could move her, claim she attacked an officer, or worse. These two have a pattern. Then we don't use standard protocol, Hayes said firmly. Activate the contingency team and get me the Attorney General on a secure line. Now. Officer Zoe Chen splashed cold water on her face, trying to steady her shaking hands. In the 6 months since graduating from the police academy, she'd witnessed things that made her stomach turn. But nothing like tonight. The locker room door swung open. Chen froze as Reed and Simmons entered, laughing. That bitch won't make it to morning arraignment, Reed was saying, opening his locker. Reynolds is sending her to county on the 5 a.m. transport. She'll have an accident en route. Shame about the faulty restraints, Simmons chuckled, checking his phone. These things happen. Chen ducked her head, pretending to tie her shoe as her mind raced. They were planning to kill Maya during transport, and Captain Reynolds was involved. The men continued talking, unaware of her presence until she accidentally knocked over a water bottle. The plastic clattered loudly against the tile floor. Both officers turned. Reed's smile faded, replaced by something cold and calculating. Officer Chen, he said slowly. Working late tonight? Just finishing paperwork, sir, she managed, gathering her things. Night shift and all. Funny, Simmons said, stepping closer. I don't remember seeing you on the night rotation. Chen's heart hammered in her chest. Covering for Martinez, his kid's sick. Reed exchanged a look with Simmons. You know, loyalty's important in this job, Chen. We're like family. And family keeps secrets, right? Right, she nodded, edging toward the door. Of course. Good, Marnum, Reed said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Because it would be a shame if something happened to that scholarship of yours. Or to your mother's citizenship application. The threat hung in the air, clear as day. I understand, sir, Chen whispered, slipping out the door. Once in the hallway, she leaned against the wall, nauseated by the choice before her. Her entire life, her mother's life, her career, all hanging in the balance. But a woman's life was at stake. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone and opened the encrypted messaging app her college roommate had installed, the one that left no digital footprint. They're going to kill her during transport, she typed to the number Jordan Michaels had been broadcasting at the end of his TikTok videos. 5 a.m. county route. She hit send, then deleted the app completely. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. Judge Sarah Martinez was not accustomed to being woken at 4 in the morning, yet here she was in her chambers, still in the sweats she'd thrown on, facing the Seattle Police Department's legal counsel and a grim-faced Eliza Wong from the Seattle Times. Let me get this straight, the judge said, adjusting her glasses. You're requesting an emergency injunction to prevent the transfer of a prisoner based on a TikTok video and anonymous texts? Based on credible evidence of imminent danger to the defendant, Eliza corrected, and based on this, she slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printouts of all 31 complaints against Reed and Simmons, alongside death certificates for 2 individuals who had died in custody after being arrested by the officers. These men have a pattern, Your Honor, and I have a source inside the precinct who confirms they plan to stage an accident during this morning's transport. The police department's attorney scoffed. This is preposterous. These are decorated officers. Decorated officers with a suspicious number of in-custody deaths, Judge Martinez interrupted, scanning the documents. And a defendant arrested under extremely questionable circumstances. She looked up at the clock. 4:17 a.m. The transport would leave in 43 minutes. Miss Wong, are you willing to go on record with these allegations? This could end your career if you're wrong. Eliza met her gaze steadily. With respect, Your Honor, if I'm right and we do nothing, it will end Maya Johnson's life. The judge nodded slowly, then reached for her judicial stamp. Emergency stay granted. No prisoner transfers until full hearing, and I want those officers in my courtroom at 9 a.m. sharp. As the police attorney sputtered protests, Judge Martinez held up her hand. Save it for the hearing, counselor, and I suggest you prepare your arguments carefully, because from what I'm seeing, this case stinks to high heaven. Jordan Michaels' hands shook as he read the encrypted message from Officer Chen. His modest apartment had transformed into a makeshift command center, with 3 laptops running live streams and a whiteboard tracking police scanner activity. They're planning to kill her during transport, he told his 900,000 viewers, voice cracking with urgency. 5 a.m. County Road. This isn't conspiracy theory stuff. This is happening right now. Comments flooded in faster than he could read them. I live near the precinct. What can I do? Lawyers in the chat, can we file emergency motions? My cousin works at the courthouse, texting her now. Jordan had never imagined his pandemic hobby of police accountability would lead to this moment. 2 years ago, he'd been a college dropout working at a coffee shop. Now his TikTok channel had become Seattle's most trusted source for exposing police misconduct. Listen up, everyone, he said, the determination in his voice belying his youth. We need eyes on every inch of that transport route. If you're near Capitol Hill or the I-90 corridor, grab your phone and start recording. Peacefully. Do not interfere, just document. He pinned a link to a crowdsourced map where viewers could track the transport van's expected path. Within minutes, hundreds of digital pins appeared as people positioned themselves along the route. Jordan's second phone buzzed, a text from Darius King. Judge Martinez issued emergency stay, no transport, but we need more evidence against these officers, fast. We got a temporary win, people, Jordan announced, relief washing over his face. But this isn't over. Keep those live streams going. And if you have evidence of Reed or Simmons abusing power, now's the time to share it. Use the hashtag # Seattle Cops Exposed. Across Seattle, phones lit up with notifications. Ordinary citizens began combing through their camera rolls, finding and uploading past encounters with the notorious officers. By dawn, the hashtag would contain over 700 videos, each one a small piece of the larger puzzle of systemic abuse. Director Hayes stalked between workstations, the massive wall screens displaying various feeds from Seattle. One showed a thermal image of the precinct, another tracked social media analytics of the exploding hashtag, and a third monitored Maya's vital signs. Judge Martinez's stay bought us time, Hayes told his team, his voice tight with controlled anger. But we still have an operative in hostile custody and a police department scrambling to cover their tracks. Senior analyst Rachel Chen looked up from her keyboard. Sir, we've got movement. Captain Reynolds just arrived at the precinct, and he's called an emergency meeting with all night shift officers. Hayes leaned over her shoulder, studying the heat signatures on the screen. They're panicking. Good. When people panic, they make mistakes. There's more, sir, said technical specialist Kumar, sliding a tablet across the desk. We cross-referenced Officer Chen's background with known associates. She's been in contact with Jordan Michaels, the TikToker who recorded the initial arrest, and she just downloaded a secure messaging app 2 hours ago. She's our whistleblower, Hayes murmured. Keep an eye on her. If they suspect she leaked information, she's in danger. A red alert flashed across the main screen. Maya's heart rate had suddenly spiked. What's happening? Hayes demanded. Rachel's fingers flew across her keyboard. They've moved her to an interrogation room. No cameras inside, but we're picking up raised voices through ambient mics. Hayes' expression darkened. Mobilize the extraction team. Now. Maya sat calmly at the metal table, her wrists cuffed to a steel ring bolted to its surface. The room was deliberately cold, a common tactic to wear down suspects. Across from her, Reed paced like a caged animal, while Simmons leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You've caused quite a stir, Reed said, his casual tone contradicted by the vein pulsing in his forehead. Social media's blowing up. Judge Martinez just blocked your transfer. almost like someone tipped them off. Maya said nothing, her expression neutral despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The emergency beacon in her watch was still active, and every word they spoke was being recorded by her necklace, at least until they confiscated it. "Here's what I don't understand," Reed continued, stopping directly in front of her. "We've run this operation dozens of times. Plant drugs, make arrests, boost our numbers. Simple. But you—" He leaned closer, studying her face. "You're too calm. Most people would be begging by now." "Maybe I know something you don't," Maya replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Simmons pushed off from the wall. "Like what?" "Like the fact that your precinct's predictive policing algorithm is illegally targeting black neighborhoods. Like the fact that your routine traffic stops follow a pattern that violates federal civil rights law. Like the fact that your captain is taking kickbacks from a private prison corporation that pays per inmate." Both officers froze. "Who the fuck are you?" Reed whispered, real fear flickering in his eyes for the first time. The door burst open. Captain Reynolds entered, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "Get out," he ordered the officers. "Both of you, now!" When they'd gone, Reynolds sat across from Maya, sliding a tablet between them. On the screen was her CIA personnel file, heavily redacted, but with her photo clearly visible. "Special Agent Maya Johnson," he read aloud. "Counterintelligence Division, 2 years undercover investigating police corruption in major urban centers." He looked up, his eyes cold. "You've been busy." Maya leaned forward, the chains of her handcuffs clinking against the table. "So have you, Captain. Quite the operation you're running. Falsified reports, evidence tampering, algorithmic targeting of minority communities. The Attorney General will be fascinated." Reynolds' laugh was hollow. "You think you're the first Fed to come sniffing around? We have friends in Washington too, Agent Johnson. Very powerful friends who understand that maintaining order sometimes requires flexibility." "Is that what you call it when people die in your custody? Flexibility?" Reynolds' expression hardened. He reached across the table and yanked the chain from her neck, examining the pendant. "Clever," he said, dropping it into his pocket. "But it won't matter. No recording device, no evidence. And in a few hours, there'll be no witness either." As he stood to leave, Maya smiled, the first genuine expression she'd shown since her arrest. "What's so funny?" Reynolds demanded. "You just admitted to premeditated murder in a room that's been broadcasting to Langley for the past 6 hours?" she said softly. "And you still haven't found all my recording devices." The captain's face drained of color. The first rays of dawn broke over Seattle's skyline as a convoy of unmarked black SUVs rolled to a stop outside the police precinct. Men and women in tactical gear and FBI windbreakers deployed with military precision, securing the perimeter. Special Agent Marcus Green, the FBI's Seattle Field Office Director, strode toward the entrance, flanked by his team. Behind them, news vans were already setting up, cameras capturing the unprecedented scene. Inside, the night shift officers watched in stunned silence as the federal agents entered, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dread. "This is a federal operation," Green announced, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent bullpen. "By order of the Attorney General, this precinct is temporarily under FBI jurisdiction, pending investigation into civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and conspiracy charges." He held up a document bearing the Justice Department seal. "We have warrants to seize all records, electronic devices, and evidence related to the arrest of Maya Johnson and any cases handled by Officers Jason Reed and Mike Simmons over the past 3 years." Captain Reynolds emerged from the hallway, his face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. You can't just—" "Captain Michael Reynolds," Green interrupted. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, tampering with evidence, and conspiracy to commit murder." He nodded to 2 agents who moved forward with handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." From her position at a desk near the back, Officer Chen watched the scene unfold, her heart racing. When an agent approached her, she expected to be arrested along with the others. Instead, he leaned down and whispered, "Agent Johnson says thank you. You did the right thing." Relief washed over her as she realized she'd chosen the right side of history after all. While federal agents combed through the precinct, Darius King and Lakeisha Williams hosted an emergency community briefing, The coalition's office was packed with concerned citizens, journalists, and local officials, all eager to understand the morning's explosive events. What we're witnessing is the tip of the iceberg, Lakeisha explained, standing before a projection screen displaying a complex flowchart. For years, the Seattle PD has used a predictive policing algorithm called Safe Streets to determine patrol patterns and resource allocation. She clicked to the next slide, a map of Seattle with certain neighborhoods highlighted in red. These high-risk areas consistently received heightened police presence, resulting in disproportionate arrests and citations. But here's the kicker. The algorithm was fed historical arrest data that already contained racial bias. Darius stepped forward. In other words, they created a digital feedback loop. More patrols in black and brown neighborhoods led to more arrests, which led to those neighborhoods being labeled high crime, which justified even more patrols. A city council member raised her hand. But didn't the department claim the algorithm was race neutral? That it only considered crime statistics? That's the insidious part, Darius replied. On paper, it doesn't mention race. But when you overlay these patrol zones with demographic data, he clicked to the next slide, which showed an almost perfect correspondence between the algorithm's target areas and neighborhoods with high concentrations of Black, Hispanic, and Native American residents. This isn't coincidence, Lakeisha added, and thanks to whistleblowers like Officer Chen, we now have internal communications proving department leadership knew exactly what they were doing. At the back of the room, Jordan Michaels live-streamed the presentation to his now 1.2 million followers, the comments section exploding with shocked reactions from around the country. The technology isn't inherently evil, he narrated for his viewers. But when biased data meets unchecked power, this is what happens. And it's not just Seattle, it's everywhere. Maya sat across from Officer Mike Simmons in a sterile interview room, her CIA credentials now prominently displayed on the lanyard around her neck. The officer looked defeated, his cocky demeanor replaced by the hollow-eyed stare of a man who knew his career, and possibly his freedom, was over. Here's your situation, Simmons, Maya said, sliding a folder across the table. We have you on video planting evidence. We have testimony from multiple victims of your previous setups. We have digital records of the algorithm you exploited. And now we have Captain Reynolds ready to throw you under the bus to save himself. Simmons swallowed hard. I want immunity. That's not on the table, Maya replied coolly. But cooperation might mean the difference between 20 years and 10. What do you want to know? Everything. How it started. Who authorized it? How many others were involved? And most importantly, where the pressure came from. Simmons hesitated, then seemed to deflate. It started 3 years ago. Crime stats were down, but the department wanted more arrests to justify budget increases. Reynolds called it proactive policing, but really we were just boosting numbers. By targeting Black drivers, he nodded reluctantly. The algorithm made it easy. It told us where to patrol, and the department's leadership looked the other way when we bent the rules. Planting drugs isn't bending rules, Maya said sharply. It's destroying lives. I know, Simmons whispered, his voice barely audible. I know what we did. And the higher-ups? The ones Reynolds referred to as powerful friends? The officer's eyes darted to the camera in the corner, then back to Maya. There's a private prison contract, state level. The more inmates from Seattle, the more funding. Some of that money finds its way back to the department. Names, Simmons. I need names. He took a deep breath, then began to talk. By noon, thousands had gathered in downtown Seattle. What began as a spontaneous protest had evolved into something more organized, more focused. Digital activism had transformed into physical presence as numbers Seattle cops exposed jumped from screens to streets. Jordan Michaels stood on a makeshift platform, his live stream now broadcasting to over 2 million viewers nationwide. Beside him were Darius King, Lakeisha Williams, and families of those previously arrested by Reed and Simmons. This isn't just about 2 corrupt cops or 1 racist algorithm, Jordan shouted, his voice amplified by the crowd repeating his words in waves, the human microphone technique perfected during previous movements. This is about a system designed to perpetuate inequality. This is about technology being weaponized against our communities. This is about demand for change, real, structural change. Across the country, similar gatherings were forming in cities where the same predictive policing software had been deployed. The hashtag had expanded to #algorithmic justice now, with tech activists joining forces with civil rights organizations. In her office at City Hall, Mayor Patricia Hernandez watched the live stream with a mixture of concern and determination. The police chief had already submitted his resignation, and public pressure was mounting for a complete departmental overhaul. She picked up her phone and dialed. "This is Mayor Hernandez. I want to address the protesters at Westlake, and I need the city council convened for an emergency session today." Maya studied the evidence wall, where photos of key players connected with Red String told the story of corruption that reached far beyond Seattle. State officials, software developers, private prison executives, a web of profit and power built on the backs of marginalized communities. Director Hayes approached, offering her a cup of coffee. "Quite the operation you've uncovered." "It's bigger than we thought," she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "The algorithm's been deployed in 12 cities. Same pattern everywhere." "The Attorney General is preparing a multi-jurisdiction task force," Hayes replied. "This will be the biggest civil rights case in decades." Maya nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. "Something bothering you, Johnson?" She turned to face him. "All those people, all those years. We're dismantling the system, but what about the victims? The ones still serving time on fabricated charges?" Hayes sighed. "Legal team's working on it. Case reviews, exonerations. But it's a slow process." "Too slow," Maya said quietly. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Jordan Michaels was live streaming from the protest, and the mayor was about to speak. "I need to be there," she said suddenly. Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Your cover's blown, Johnson. Your part in this operation is over. With all due respect, sir, this isn't just an operation anymore. This is a movement, and they deserve to know the truth." The director studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Do what you need to do, Agent Johnson. But remember who you work for." Maya met his gaze steadily. "I've never forgotten." Mayor Hernandez had just finished her speech, announcing a series of emergency measures. Suspension of the predictive policing program, external review of all arrests made using the algorithm, and the formation of a civilian oversight committee with real enforcement power. The crowd's reaction was cautiously positive. These were significant steps, but generations of broken promises had taught them to be skeptical. As the mayor stepped down, a murmur ran through the gathering. Maya Johnson approached the microphone, her CIA credentials visible around her neck. "My name is Maya Johnson," she began, her voice carrying across the suddenly hushed crowd. 36 hours ago, I was arrested by officers Reed and Simmons in a setup designed to silence me. What they didn't know was that I was undercover, investigating police corruption as part of a 2-year federal operation. Shocked whispers rippled through the audience. "I've seen the evidence. I've heard the confessions. I know how deep this goes, from patrol officers to state officials, from software developers to private prison corporations. A perfect machine designed to criminalize blackness, to convert human beings into profit." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some angry, some tearful, all intent. "The federal government will pursue this case. There will be arrests, trials, reforms. That's important work, but it's not enough." Maya unclipped her CIA badge and held it up. "This gave me protection that most of you don't have. When I was arrested, a team of federal agents was tracking my every move. But who tracks the arrests in your neighborhoods? Who protects your children, your parents, your friends when they're pulled over for a broken taillight?" She lowered the badge. "The system isn't broken. It's functioning exactly as designed, and changing it will take more than one case or one protest. It will take sustained pressure, community oversight, and a fundamental reimagining of public safety." Jordan stepped forward, his live stream capturing every word for the millions now watching. "What happens next isn't up to the CIA or the FBI or even the mayor's office," Maya continued. "It's up to all of you. The algorithms might be digital, but the solution is human. It's in the connections you're making right now, the networks you're building, the power you're reclaiming." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause as Maya stepped back from the microphone, her words igniting a fire that would spread far beyond Seattle. The marble halls of Seattle's federal courthouse echoed with footsteps as Maya Johnson made her way through security. She wore a tailored navy pantsuit, her natural hair styled in a perfectly shaped afro, an image that had already been shared millions of times across social media platforms, becoming an icon of resistance. Reporters clustered at the entrance, shouting questions as she passed. Maya acknowledged them with a nod, but saved her words for the courtroom, where they would matter most. Inside, the gallery was packed. Jordan Michaels sat in the front row, live streaming with permission from the judge, an unprecedented move that had required special federal clearance. Beside him were Lakeisha Williams, Darius King, and Officer Zoe Chen, whose testimony had proven crucial in building the case. On the defense side, a team of high-priced attorneys surrounded former Captain Reynolds, Officers Reed and Simmons, and 3 executives from PredictPath, the company behind the algorithmic policing software. They whispered urgently among themselves, their expressions grim. "All rise," called the bailiff as Judge William Thornton entered, his reputation for fairness and legal precision making him the perfect choice for such a high-profile case. As the proceedings began, Maya caught sight of Director Hayes sitting discreetly in the back row. Their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement of how far they'd come and how much remained at stake. U.S. Attorney Sophia Martinez approached the podium, her opening statement crisp and devastating. "Your Honor, what we have before us is not simply a case of individual corruption, but a deliberate system designed to target and criminalize specific communities using modern technology as a weapon. The evidence will show that the defendants not only knew about this targeting, but actively refined and expanded it over years, resulting in hundreds of false arrests, dozens of wrongful convictions, and at least 3 deaths in custody." Maya watched the jurors' faces, noting their shock as Martinez outlined the conspiracy that had united police leadership, tech companies, and prison contractors in a profitable cycle of injustice. This was just the beginning of a legal battle that would likely span months, but today's testimony would set the tone. When her name was called, Maya took the stand, her hands steady as she was sworn in. The weight of countless lives rested on her shoulders as she prepared to detail every aspect of her investigation. This wasn't just about punishing the guilty, it was about creating a record that could drive systemic change. "Agent Johnson," Martinez began, "please tell the court how Operation Oversight began." Maya took a deep breath and started from the beginning. The courtroom fell silent as Maya displayed the evidence that had been gathering dust in internal affairs files for years. Evidence that might have remained buried forever, if not for her investigation. On the large screen, a series of emails appeared, showing how Captain Reynolds had personally adjusted the PredictPath algorithm's parameters to focus more intensely on predominantly Black neighborhoods. This change, Maya explained, pointing to specific code, created what data scientists call a feedback loop. More officers were sent to these neighborhoods, resulting in more arrests, which the algorithm interpreted as confirming these areas needed even more police presence. "And were these arrests legitimate?" Attorney Martinez asked. "No," Maya said firmly. "Our analysis found that approximately 62% of drug arrests made by the tactical unit, led by officers Reed and Simmons, involved planted evidence, falsified reports, or illegal searches." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reed shifted uncomfortably in his seat as his attorney scribbled furious notes. Next came the financial trail. Documents showing how the private prison corporation, Sentinel Corrections, had paid consulting fees to a shell company owned by Reynolds' brother-in-law. For each prisoner sent to their facilities from Seattle, bonuses were distributed up the chain. "It wasn't just racism," Maya testified, her voice steady despite the damning nature of her words. "It was profit. Each false arrest represented approximately $43,000 in annual revenue for Sentinel. Multiply that by hundreds of arrests, and you're looking at millions in incentivized injustice." The defense attorneys objected repeatedly, but Judge Thornton allowed most of the evidence, recognizing its relevance to establishing the conspiracy. As the day wore on, Maya presented the most disturbing evidence yet: internal communications discussing acceptable casualties if suspects died in custody, complete with calculated estimates of settlement costs, versus the expense of changing their practices. By the time she stepped down from the witness stand, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted from professional legal proceeding to barely contained outrage. Even the jurors, selected for their impartiality, struggled to mask their shock. Outside, the crowd following Jordan's livestream had grown to over 3 million viewers, with commentators and activists dissecting each revelation in real time. Algorithmic justice and Maya testifies trended nationwide, the case becoming a flashpoint for a long overdue national conversation. The defense strategy became clear on the third day of trial: discredit Maya Johnson at all costs. Reynolds' attorney, a silver-haired man with the smooth delivery of a televangelist, approached the cross-examination like a surgeon, looking for any weakness to exploit. "Agent Johnson," he began, pacing slowly before the witness stand, "your undercover operation lasted nearly 2 years, is that correct?" "Yes," Maya replied, her posture relaxed but alert. "And during those 2 years, you personally observed many arrests?" "I did. Yet you never intervened, never identified yourself as a federal agent, never stopped what you now characterize as grave injustices. Why is that?" Maya didn't flinch. "My mission was to document the full scope of corruption, which extended far beyond individual arrests. Revealing myself prematurely would have jeopardized the larger investigation. So you allowed innocent people to be arrested, to be jailed, to have their lives destroyed, for the greater good?" His tone dripped with sarcasm. Before Maya could answer, a commotion erupted at the back of the courtroom. A woman stood, her voice breaking through the murmurs. "My son is one of those people," she called out. "Arrested by Reed and Simmons 2 years ago. He's still serving time." Judge Thornton gabbled for order as the woman was quietly escorted out. But her interruption hung in the air, highlighting the human cost of the investigation. The defense attorney pressed on. "Agent Johnson, isn't it true that the CIA is prohibited from operating domestically? That your entire operation may have been illegal from the start?" Maya looked directly at the jury. "I was temporarily assigned to a joint FBI-CIA task force, specifically authorized by Executive Order 13-957 to investigate domestic civil rights violations with potential international components. The Russian disinformation campaigns of 2020 revealed that racial tensions were being deliberately exacerbated by foreign actors. Our mandate was to identify vulnerabilities in law enforcement that could be exploited." The attorney faltered slightly, having not anticipated this answer. "Nevertheless," when he recovered, "you operated without local knowledge or oversight. You made decisions affecting Seattle citizens without any accountability to them." "The accountability failure," Maya responded calmly, "was within the Seattle Police Department, where officers like Reed and Simmons operated without oversight for years. My investigation simply exposed what should have been caught by internal systems long ago." As the cross-examination continued, Maya weathered each attack with measured responses, refusing to be provoked into an emotional reaction that could undermine her credibility. But despite her professional composure, the defense had succeeded in raising an uncomfortable question. In fighting injustice, had the federal government perpetuated it? Officer Zoe Chen took the stand on the 5th day, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. At just 26, she was risking her entire career, and possibly her safety, by testifying against her former colleagues. Unlike Maya, Chen wasn't protected by a federal agency. She was a rookie cop who had made the life-altering decision to stand against corruption, knowing she would forever be branded a traitor by some of her colleagues. "Officer Chen," Attorney Martinez began gently, "please tell the court about your first encounter with what you believe to be misconduct by the defendants." Chen swallowed hard, her voice initially soft but gaining strength as she spoke. "It was during my 3rd week on patrol. I was assigned to ride with Officer Reed. We pulled over a young black man in the Central District. The stated reason was an expired registration, but his tags were current. I checked before we even activated the lights." "What happened next?" "Officer Reed found a small bag of what appeared to be cocaine in the man's glove compartment. The man was shocked, kept saying it wasn't his. I didn't think much of it at the time. Suspects often deny possession. Did your perspective change? Chen nodded, her eyes lowering briefly. Later that night, in the locker room, I overheard Reed telling Simmons that they were 5 short of their monthly quota. Simmons told him not to worry. They had plenty of inventory for the weekend shift. Inventory, Martinez repeated. What did you understand that to mean? Drugs to plant, Chen said simply. Evidence to fabricate. The defense's objection was immediate and vehement, but Judge Thornton allowed the testimony to continue. Chen went on to describe a pattern of behavior, the selective enforcement, the falsified reports, the celebration when arrest quotas were met. She recounted conversations where officers explicitly discussed which neighborhoods to target based on racial demographics rather than actual crime data. Did you report these concerns? Martinez asked. 3 times, Chen replied, her voice cracking slightly. First to my direct supervisor, then to Internal Affairs, finally to the Office of Police Accountability. Each time I was told the matter would be looked into. Each time, nothing happened. And the night of Maya Johnson's arrest? What made you take more direct action then? Chen straightened in her seat. I heard them planning to kill her. They were going to stage an accident during transport. I couldn't... She paused, composing herself. I couldn't be complicit in murder. That's when I sent the anonymous tip. As she described the threats made against her and her family after Reed and Simmons suspected her involvement, the courtroom listened in stunned silence. Here was the human face of the system, a young woman who had joined law enforcement to protect her community, only to discover she was part of the machinery oppressing it. On cross-examination, the defense tried to paint Chen as disgruntled, naive, or attention-seeking, but her quiet dignity and consistent testimony proved unshakable. By the time she stepped down, it was clear to everyone present. This wasn't one whistleblower against the system. This was the system itself being laid bare. The technical portion of the trial began with testimony from Dr. Aisha Kamara, a data scientist specializing in algorithmic bias. Using simplified visualizations, she explained to the jury how PredictPath had been manipulated to produce the desired outcomes. What we see here, she said, indicating a color-coded map of Seattle, is a textbook case of selection bias. The algorithm was trained on historical arrest data from areas that were already over-policed. It then recommended deploying officers to those same areas, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. The defense's technical expert argued that the algorithm was mathematically neutral, simply processing data without bias. But Dr. Kamara countered with internal emails showing that when the software initially flagged wealthy neighborhoods for increased patrols based on reported property crimes, the parameters were manually adjusted to exclude areas with median home values above $750,000. This wasn't a neutral tool making objective recommendations, she concluded. This was a sophisticated mechanism for laundering human bias through technology, creating the illusion of data-driven policing while actually perpetuating existing patterns of discrimination. As the technical discussion continued, Jordan Michaels worked with online explainers to create accessible breakdowns of the testimony, helping his growing audience understand the significance of algorithmic justice. His live stream had evolved from simple documentation to educational platform, with experts joining him to answer viewer questions about facial recognition, predictive policing, and digital rights. Meanwhile, in city halls and state legislatures across the country, officials watched the proceedings with mounting concern. Many had implemented similar systems, assured by vendors that the technology was unbiased and effective. Now those assurances were being systematically dismantled in a federal courtroom. By the time the prosecution rested its case, public opinion had shifted dramatically. The hashtag number sign, audit our algorithms, spread from police accountability circles to broader discussions of AI ethics in healthcare education and financial services. What began as a corruption case had evolved into a referendum on the role of artificial intelligence in public institutions. While the trial proceeded by day, the community organized by night. The Seattle Justice Coalition transformed a local community center into an operation headquarters, with working groups focused on different aspects of the emerging movement. In one room, tech volunteers built a public dashboard tracking police interactions across the city using data from body cameras that had suddenly become much more reliably activated. In another, legal aid workers assisted families of those potentially wrongfully convicted, preparing appeals based on the evidence emerging from the trial. Maya Johnson arrived after her court appearance, slipping in quietly through a side entrance. Despite her exhaustion, she had promised to speak with the families, to look in the eyes of those whose loved ones had been imprisoned while she gathered evidence. An elderly woman approached her, clutching a photograph of a young man. "That's my grandson," she said, her voice wavering. 3 years for possession. He keeps telling us it wasn't his, but who would believe him against a police officer's word? Maya took the photo, studying the smiling face. "We're going to help him," she said softly. "The U.S. attorney is already reviewing cases connected to these officers." "But will it bring back the 3 years he lost?" the woman asked, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. There was no good answer. Maya could only listen as family after family shared similar stories. Lives interrupted, futures derailed, trust shattered. The human cost of systemic injustice couldn't be calculated in statistics or summarized in testimony. Later, as community leaders discussed next steps, the conversation turned to the future. The trial would end, the media would eventually move on, but the community would remain. "We need more than convictions," Darius King argued passionately. "We need structural change that prevents this from happening again. And accountability that doesn't depend on a whistleblower being brave enough to risk everything," added Lakeisha Williams. As discussions continued into the night, Maya found herself drawn to their vision. A world where justice wasn't an afterthought, but a foundation, where communities had the power to shape their own safety. Director Hayes had already hinted at a promotion waiting for her after the trial, a senior position at Langley with greater authority and resources. It was everything she had worked toward throughout her career. Yet sitting here, among people fighting for change without badges or government authority, she felt a different kind of purpose taking root. A question began to form in her mind, one that would demand an answer soon. Where could she do the most good? The courtroom was silent as the jury foreman stood, the verdict form clutched in his hand. After 3 weeks of testimony and 4 days of deliberation, justice would finally be pronounced. Maya sat beside Attorney Martinez, her expression composed despite the thunder of her heartbeat. Across the aisle, the defendants presented a range of emotions. Reynolds stone-faced, Reed visibly anxious, Simmons seemingly resigned to his fate. On count 1, conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, we find the defendant, Michael Reynolds, guilty. A collective exhale swept through the gallery. The litany continued. Guilty on evidence tampering, guilty on conspiracy to commit murder, guilty on racketeering charges. One by one, the defendants were convicted on most counts, with only a few technical charges resulting in acquittals. For the Predict Path executives, the verdict was mixed. Guilty of fraud for misrepresenting their algorithm's neutrality, but acquitted on civil rights charges after successfully arguing they hadn't controlled how their tool was implemented. As Judge Thornton thanked the jury for their service, Maya felt a complex wave of emotions. This was a victory, perhaps the most significant of her career, but it was incomplete. The system that enabled these individuals remained largely intact, and those who had suffered under it still waited for justice. Outside the courthouse, hundreds had gathered to hear the verdict. Jordan Michaels stood on the steps, his live stream now followed by over 5 million viewers nationwide. "They're guilty," he announced, triggering cheers from the crowd. "But this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. The real work starts now." Maya stood before Director Hayes in his wood-paneled office, the commendation letter in her hand. Operation Oversight had been deemed an unqualified success, leading to reforms in police departments nationwide and a complete overhaul of federal guidelines for predictive policing. "Deputy Director of Operations," Hayes said, nodding toward the letter. "You've earned it, Johnson. No one else could have handled this case with your combination of skill and integrity." "Thank you, sir," Maya replied, sincerity in her voice despite her inner conflict. "You'll have authority over similar operations across the country. Real power to effect change from the inside." Maya placed the letter carefully on his desk. "With respect, sir, I've been thinking about a different path." Hayes's expression shifted to one of concern. Don't tell me the defense got to you with all that talk about federal overreach. No, Maya said, smiling slightly. But they did raise a valid question. Who watches the watchers? We expose corruption in Seattle, but similar systems operate in cities everywhere, often with federal funding or approval. That's exactly why we need you in this position, Hayes argued. You can help reform those systems. Reform isn't enough, Maya replied quietly. Sometimes you need to reimagine from the ground up. And to do that effectively, I need to work from a different angle. Hayes leaned back, studying her face. You're leaving? It wasn't a question, but Maya nodded confirmation. The Seattle Justice Coalition has asked me to lead a new initiative, developing community-centered alternatives to predictive policing, and Councilwoman Foster has proposed a citizen oversight division with actual enforcement authority. You're trading federal resources for a local nonprofit? Hayes sounded incredulous. I'm trading authority for authenticity, Maya corrected gently. The ability to work directly with the communities most affected, to build solutions from the ground up rather than imposing them from above. Hayes was silent for a long moment, disappointment warring with understanding in his expression. Finally, he sighed. I can't say I'm not disappointed, Johnson. You're one of our best. I'll always be grateful for what I learned here, Maya said, extending her hand. And who knows? Maybe our paths will cross again. Hayes took her hand, his grip firm. They call it a revolving door for a reason. When you tire of operating on a shoestring budget with no institutional support, my offer stands. Maya smiled. I appreciate that, sir. But something tells me this is where I'm meant to be. The new Seattle Justice Center buzzed with activity. In one corner, Jordan Michaels led a workshop on digital security for activists. In another, Officer Chen, now working for the newly established Oversight Division, trained community volunteers on proper documentation of police interactions. Maya moved through the space with purpose, stopping occasionally to check progress or offer guidance. The walls were covered with maps, data visualizations, and flowcharts tracking everything from prison demographics to court outcomes. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lakeisha. Turn on the news? Maya grabbed a remote, unmuting the large screen mounted on the wall. A somber-faced news anchor appeared. In a historic settlement announced today, Sentinel Corrections and PredictPath Software have agreed to pay $300 million to individuals wrongfully arrested or imprisoned through the use of their technologies. The settlement, negotiated by the Department of Justice, also requires both companies to submit to external algorithmic audits and regular civil rights compliance reviews. Cheers erupted throughout the center. This wasn't just a victory for Seattle. It was a precedent that would reverberate across the country, forcing similar companies to reckon with the human consequences of their products. As the celebration continued around her, Maya stepped outside onto the center's small balcony. The Seattle skyline stretched before her, the Space Needle illuminated against the darkening sky. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from undercover operative to community leader, from exposing injustice to building something better in its place. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Director Hayes containing a news link. The headline read, Justice Department creates new division to audit law enforcement AI. A small smile curved Maya's lips. Change was happening from the inside too. Slower perhaps, but with the weight of institutional power behind it. This was how progress worked. Pressure from below, reform from above, and brave individuals standing at the fulcrum points. Jordan joined her on the balcony, his ever-present phone capturing the skyline for his followers. You know what today is, right? He asked, turning the camera toward her. Maya raised an eyebrow. Monday. It's exactly 3 months since you were arrested, he said. 3 months since 2 cops thought they could frame a black woman and get away with it, not knowing she'd bring down their whole corrupt system. Maya laughed softly. I had a lot of help. That's what makes this different, Jordan agreed, panning his camera to capture the bustling activity inside. It wasn't just one hero, it was all of us together. Maya nodded, her gaze returning to the city spread out before them, a city forever changed, yet with so much work still to be done. That's how we win, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. Together, one algorithm, one policy, one community at a time. Jordan ended his live stream with a flourish, addressing his now 7 million followers. You heard it here first, folks. This isn't the end of the story, it's just the beginning. Keep watching, keep recording, keep demanding change. Justice isn't just awakened, it's wide awake and ready to work. As night fell over Seattle, the lights of the Justice Center burned bright, a beacon of what was possible when technology served humanity, not the other way around. And at its heart stood Maya Johnson, no longer undercover, her purpose clear and her path forward illuminated by the simple, powerful truth that had guided her from the start. Justice delayed is justice denied, but justice reimagined is a revolution in waiting.